My name is Ann Svennungsen. I'm Bishop of the Minneapolis Area Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Well, I come from a long line of pastors. I come from German and Norwegian immigrants, and especially in Norway, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, many generations. So that was a legacy as part of our family, but my grandfather, David Svennungsen, and Kari had 9 children and 26 grandchildren, and I was the only one who sensed this call to ministry and went to seminary. So unfortunately, he had died by the time, I went to seminary. But that was kind of in my family of origin. So it was more of a familial legacy as opposed to one person. My life in the local congregation was hugely influential. I was a small town in Montana, Shelby, up on had the High Line, and church was a central part of our lives. We were there for all kinds of events, and it was a place I could be a leader, in the Luther League or different kinds of things, and so I was able to explore that leadership role, but never in my mind was that in any way a prelude to becoming a pastor. It didn't even cross my mind that pastoral ministry would be something available to me as a calling. I went to Concordia College in Moorhead, and my 4 years there, I started as a pharmacy major and then transferred to a math major. So I love the sciences, but I also had the good fortune of singing in the Concordia choir and was elected student body president when I was a senior, and that was the first female student body president in Concordia's 70-year history or something. So I really was privileged to have leadership experience there at the college, and during my senior year began to think, I love the mission of a place like Concordia. I love the mission of the church, and I have gifts for leadership. Maybe I need to think about continuing to explore that and see where I might be called. Probably within the church structure, maybe, work at one of our church-wide offices or something. I still, seminary was, pastoral ministry was still kind of almost a foreign concept for me to think about as a female. So, at Concordia, Paul Christensen, the director of the choir, was extremely influential, and when I told him my senior year that I was going to seminary to explore what I might be called to do, he just took such a fascinating interest in that. He was just real curious about what all that meant. And kind of delightfully, when I was called to Moorhead to serve as a pastor when I was in my 40s, he was a member of the congregation, Trinity Lutheran in Moorhead, and when he died, I was his pastor. I was there at his home when, just after he died, and I preached at his funeral. So the richness of those experiences is pretty profound. For me, it was a very lengthy process of discernment, and it had a lot to do with that Buechner quote, your call is where the world's deep need and your deep passion meet. Your call is where you see you have gifts and you have passion, but also there is need in the world. And so throughout my young adulthood, it was a sense of, okay, I have gifts in these areas, and I have a passion for the work of the church, and I'm receiving affirmation for those gifts. So it wasn't just myself, thinking I have these gifts, but others affirming that. But I still was really grateful for the Lutheran tradition, because on your 3rd year of seminary, you go on an internship. And so it's kind of like being a student pastor. And I really held off on any final decision about, ordination as a possible calling for me until I'd finished that 1 year on internship. And And there were some just wonderful surprises and wonderful ways where I sensed God calling me and leading me in those kinds of experiences and moments of discernment, and a lot of good relationships with sisters and brothers in the faith who also gave encouragement. My immediate family was very nervous. My mom would say to people, "Yeah, my Anne's at seminary, but I think she wants to be a teacher. I think she's going to be a teacher." And one of my relatives said, I think if this is your calling, that's wonderful, but I don't know if you'll ever get married. I can't imagine." This was a male who said, "I can't imagine any men who would want to marry someone going into that vocation." So there were some real cautions from people I love and respect, um, and yeah, and also I think anytime you go into a field where you are, a very small minority, you already feel the pressure to be that there will be scrutinization or scrutiny, I guess would be the word. Much greater than if you were in a field where you were the majority. I mean, you'll be so there was some fear and trepidation about this, both from, how will what my family is worried about come true, or will they be proud even of this journey I'm on. So, a pretty specific example was I met actually my husband in seminary, so that family member was wrong that I would never get married. But um, we, during that third year, we wanted to go somewhere fun. We're both from the Midwest. Let's try to see if we could go to one of the coasts or a big city to be interns. So we were assigned to Portland, Oregon, which was, wow, that'll be perfect, it'll be great. And we were married, so we needed to go to a place where we could, live together and work in two different congregations. And so one of the congregations said, "Oh, Anne," my husband's name is Bill, "Anne or Bill, we'd love to have either as an intern here." And the other church said very clearly from the outset, "We do not want Anne, we do not want a female pastor." And then once they found out that Bill was married to a woman aspiring to be a pastor, they wouldn't take him either. So that kind of, this is 1979, and that you could say something like that so openly is, that has been something that has stuck with me as what people can feel and continue in many denominations to feel, but also how far we've come. It was a really organic process. Part of it was what was happening in my own sort of journey spiritually, developmentally, and part of it was what was happening in the church at that very time, because I was 15 when the decision was made that we could allow the ordination of women in the old ALC. And that took many years to get to the point, and many arguments to get to that decision, and then many years to be comfortable with that decision in places open to having female pastors. So yeah. I would argue that patriarchy is still a very much systemic issue in our culture, and there are certain places where I just kind of feel it, and they're primarily places where the vast majority of people in the room are men. So when I go to the Conference of Bishops, for me, that is always a little bit of a challenge, because it's 10 women and 56 men, and it has, from the beginning of the church, been men. Yeah. Oh, I have very strong feelings about this. I believe that for us to live and flourish as human community, whatever community it is, I think the leaders need to represent the diversity of the community itself. Whether we're talking about African American leaders, or we're talking about Latino leaders, or we're talking about male and female leaders, until all people can see themselves in the leaders of that community, it's hard, I think, for all to experience the dignity, the full dignity that God wants us all to experience. One of the great challenges I think we continue to face is being tempted to think of God as male, and being tempted to, because we are consistent in using male pronouns for God, and certainly our scripture and our creeds and all of that are, that is how they are written. But I think there is a need to be more expansive in our understanding and our way of speaking of God, and that is partly because God is bigger than male. God is bigger than female. God is much bigger than, and so to reduce God into one, gender is not faithful to who God is. When I was a pastor in Edina, a little girl, Elizabeth, I baptized her when she was born, and then when she was 4 or 5, I moved to Iowa for a new calling there. And I was a co-pastor with Eric Strand. So Eric Strand and Ann Svennungsen were, shared ministry there in a very, collegial way. And when she found out I was leaving, she said to her mom, "Mom, I am so sad that God is moving to Iowa, but at least Jesus," meaning Eric, "is staying here," she said. So, it's like not really great theology. On the other hand, it's like, okay, maybe her image of God will be broadened in a much more intuitive way, so that when she's 30 and in a crisis and turns to God, she doesn't think of God, first of all, as a man with, a long beard, and, but that God is this much bigger divine reality. So I think that in the church is also important for women in leadership.
That's a great.
One of the ways I like to talk about it is, as we come before God, we are told, "You are enough. Just as you are enough." And there aren't any other places in the world that say that to us. I mean, we're in every other context, there's some need to prove ourselves at some level. And this is God saying, "You're enough. I delight in you. I created you for my own delight, for my cherishing. Yeah, sure, you sin, you're broken, but the life and death and resurrection of Christ is yours, and it's all enough." And I think it's something we have to hear again and again and again, because the voices inside of us and the voices around us will say, "No, you aren't good enough. You aren't precious. You got to prove it." And that is a kind of liberation that is beyond, I think, any other sort of liberation, freedom we can feel, to have that deep sense of enoughness, belovedness, being at home in this divine presence. growing up female is not growing up with quite the confidence builders for public square work as growing up male. Maybe it's better now. But even 10 years ago, a professor at Candler's Seminary at Emory University said she had some of her most gifted students were females, but when she met with them, in conversation, they didn't feel like they had the qualities, the confidence, the strength to be able to do this. And it's like, what can I do for them? How can I help them with this? Because they are doing excellent work in their studies, they're competent people, they just don't seem to have quite the internal confidence. And so what we can do to, I think, build that confidence even from a younger age, because I think in some ways we gain it more in our families of origin, in our childhoods, is really, really important. Another kind of fun example, I was at Duke University, and we were speaking to a group of pastors, and there were 4 of us. There was a white male, a black male, a white female, maybe another white male. Yeah, I think so. 4 of us. And so someone asked, what would you do differently if you could start over being a pastor? And the first white guy said, I'd be more humble. And the African American said, I'd be more humble. And the other white person said, I'll be more humble. And I said, I would be more confident. And I think that's an interesting sort of commentary on how we need to keep building up these and helping these young, gifted women, as has been said, lean into life, lean into leadership, lean into the God who calls all to, lives of service and responsibility.